Welcome to the second Kickstart the Week podcast. This is your Comic Maven Nicole D'Andria. I've done hundreds of text interviews with creators of crowdfunding projects, typically for comic books on Kickstarter. I feel very honored that my second guest is the founder of Signal Comics, Samuel George London. Today we're talking about his Kickstarter for Band of Warriors #1, which combines historical events with a mixture of Celtic and Greek mythology. Sam is the creator and writer of this mature series, which is perfect for fans of 300 and Birthright. Be prepared for bloodshed and backstabbing. Just like last time, for full disclosure purposes, I've known Sam for a couple of years and done editing work for many books from Signal Comics, including this issue of Band of Warriors. So I have already read the book, and I'm also one of its Kickstarter backers. Enjoy the interview, and if you like what you hear, support the book on Kickstarter. I just have to pretend we haven't been talking for like the last 10 minutes.
Classic, isn't it?
Yes, it doesn't feel awkward at all. Okay. Well, hi, Sam. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast this week with us to talk about Band of Warriors.
Absolute pleasure, Nicole.
I guess we will just jump right into your Kickstarter that you have. So despite this not being your first comic book, I know you have a lot of books under your belt that you funded through Kickstarter, specifically the Milford Green series, Project Hoax, and recently Access Denied. You mentioned on the Kickstarter page that Band of Warriors was the first one that popped into your head, but you haven't done it until now. Can you talk a bit about the origins of the idea and why you waited until now to start going into it?
Yeah, so it was the summer of 2016, and I was visiting my mother's house on the island of Crete, which is basically in the middle of the Mediterranean. And yeah, it's a beautiful place. It's got mountains, it's got beaches, it's got sun, absolutely amazing place. But when visiting there, I discovered a lot of the history that was there, both ancient history, but also fairly recently kind of World War II stuff, which is really interesting. But that's not what Band of Warriors is about. Band of Warriors is about all the ancient stuff, and of course, kind of you know a little bit about ancient Greece and things, but the things that you learn at school tend to be more around about 500 BC. And what's interesting is that about 1,000 years before that, Crete, which is the biggest island in Greece, was really kind of a hub of activity, and it was more of a technologically advanced culture than mainland Greece in a lot of ways. And the reason for that was because it was a major trade hub between Egypt and the Middle East as well, and then off towards Spain and Italy and places like that. So it was a real hub of activity, and obviously with that comes wealth, and with wealth you can do almost anything. So that's kind of how it was. But when you read up on the history even more, there's a really interesting discovery that they made kind of in the 1930s. A guy called Arthur Evans, who discovered the Palace of Knossos. And he named the people that lived there the Minoans, which is after the mythological king, King Minos, who's
a lot of fun words to say.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's quite a tongue twister. But he was the father of the Minotaur, and that's what they think potentially is that the Palace of Knossos was potentially the labyrinth, because if you look at the layout of the Palace of Knossos, it's very corridor heavy with lots of pillars. It opens up to a large courtyard, but it's got a lot of corridors and things, and it basically looks like a labyrinth, which is amazing. And Minotaur actually means king bull. So Minos is king, and Tor is bull. And so potentially what it was is that the legend of Minotaur was basically a king of the bulls who lived in Crete and potentially at the Palace of Knossos. And so I found out all of this stuff whilst on Crete, and I found it really interesting because I'm very interested in history. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I didn't think much of it further. But then later in the summer, I visited my wife's parents who were in Brittany in France, and I'd visited there before, of course, but this time we went to a megalithic site, which is where they had lots of these big tall stones, kind of like a mini Stonehenge almost. And that was really close to an old tin mine that was used in the Bronze Age, which is about 1500 BC. And it turns out that tin was actually one of the largest deposits in Europe, is in Brittany in France, and in the south of Britain as well. And at the time, around 1500 BC, it was actually traded from Britain and France all the way to places like Crete, essentially. And so there was actually this trading relationship that was going on, international trading relationship going on between France, Britain, and Crete, and even Egypt. And another thing I found out that I don't speak about on the Kickstarter page is that they've actually found amber from the beaches of Denmark in Egyptian artifacts.
Oh, wow.
Which is, I know, it's incredible. So, at some point, an Egyptian would have gone up to Denmark, got some amber, and come back with it. I mean, it's wild, like when I think about it, like all those thousands of years ago. But yeah, so some of the artifacts around Crete have actually got tin from France and Britain. And the reason that tin is so important, if you're not in the know, is that bronze is made up of copper and tin. And so tin was very important at the time for making bronze, for which you made weapons, armor, and nice things as well. But obviously at the time, armor and swords spoke.
More warlike materials were a bit more preferred.
Precisely. But when I made this connection, it really kind of got my creative cogs turning, and I started kind of coming up with this story about how can I connect kind of what was going on in Crete at the time with this kind of fairly advanced civilization, and also this trading relationship with Brittany and even Britain at the time. And it started to form in my head. And I initially kind of thought, maybe I should turn this into a novel, because it's going to be pretty epic, and it might require quite a lot of explanation. And so even in 2016, I'd begun to try and outline a novel based on all of this. But as time went on, in 2018 is when I really started creating comics. And as you know, the first one I came up with was the Milford Green series for the comic, because it's, as far as it goes, it's a fairly straight storyline that doesn't require too many tangents and things. But the reason that I've waited till now for Band of Warriors is because it's quite complex down the road, certainly. So I really wanted to kind of cut my teeth with some simpler storylines first, as a comic creator, before actually going forth with an epic tale like Band of Warriors.
Kind of build up your repertoire in a way so that you could be more prepared for such a story.
Yeah, exactly that. Because if I tried to jump into Band of Warriors, I think I could have really ended up doing a bit of a half-assed job, really. I think I might have messed it up if I was to do it too early. But now I feel kind of more comfortable in my shoes as a writer. I definitely feel more confident in forging forward with a story like Band of Warriors.
Well, that's awesome that you've kind of gained the experience that you needed to get into the place where you could write this epic, as well as recognize that you probably shouldn't jump into a huge project like this right away. So I'm kind of curious, because you sound obviously very well informed about it as both like a history buff and as someone who's into mythology. How long would you say overall it took to really get the research done that you needed to really create the outline for the series?
Ooh, yeah, at least 3 years, I'd have thought. And obviously that's not full time, but
still, that's an impressive.
Yeah, it's still quite a lot of research and things. And at the same time, so there's another element to this as well that I neglected to mention. That so at the time they were actually in the midst of what's called the late Bronze Age collapse. At the same time, so around 1500 BC, there was actually a bit of a collapse of civilization, and technological advancement basically ceased for like 500 years, and that was likely started by this massive volcanic eruption that happened just off about, I think it's about 60 miles off the north coast of Crete, on this little island called Thera. It was Thera at the time. It's called Santorini now, but it's this tiny island. But basically, it was all a volcano, this island, and it erupted around 1500 BC. And when you have a massive volcanic eruption like that, it has a massive impact. I mean, all over the world, but in the local area, it really does have an impact on farming. And so if you're not able to feed people, then obviously people starve to death. It stops a lot of progress. It kind of blots out the sun, get colder temperatures, and there's so many knock-on effects that just kind of prevent civilization from progressing. So yeah, that was one of the elements that was involved with it as well. And again, that's one of the reasons that it took so long to make these connections, because there's so many things going on at the time, and then really trying to lay it all out on a cork board and get some red twine to try and make all the connections and stuff. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun at the same time as a lot of hard work.
Oh, I'm sure. I can definitely understand pushing yourself to get as much historical information as you feel you need for the story, and just I can totally see you having a good time with that.
It's a lot of fun trying to kind of make the connections and reading up on all of the mythology, but also trying to find out the actual historical events surrounding the mythology at the same time. So, for a long time, people thought that Troy, for instance, was just a story. It was just mythology. But then I think it was the early 1900s that we actually found the spot where it was based on Homer's poem. We managed to actually find it, and it turns out that mythological story it's kind of true. So it's really interesting that there are bits of truth to a lot of the mythology that's out there. And when it comes to the Minotaur, it's likely that there was potentially a king on Crete who people didn't like, and kind of my take on it is that potentially it was basically a smear campaign against Crete, the Minotaur thing, just trying to kind of make them out to be these bad people that have kind of got misshapen sons and things like that, and that they're tyrannical and things. Because what actually happened is that the Mycenaeans, who were the mainland Greeks, actually invaded Knossos and basically burnt down Crete to the ground. So you find a lot of temples and palaces that have been scorched by Mycenaeans, who are mainland Greeks. So yeah, it's really interesting to find out all these bits and try and connect it with the mythology and try and make the connections.
Yeah, I know one of the things that you definitely promoted on your Kickstarter for the comic in particular is that you're really trying to have it stay historically accurate in terms of things like the location, mild nudity, and some other things that make it a more mature comic. I'm kind of curious with just the significance of what you're keeping historically accurate, as well as how you're kind of interweaving that with what you said about the more fantastical, mythological elements.
Yeah, so for instance, the historical accuracy, one of the things that you mentioned there, so the mild nudity. So Minoan women at the time actually kind of walked around bare-breasted. So they had dresses on, but their dresses would part below their chest bone and then fan out around their breasts to kind of show them off, I guess. And because the men were walking around topless for the most part, because it was it was an even warmer climate back then as well. And yeah, I guess they just thought, the men are walking around topless, so I guess we can too. And from kind of the research that I've done in regards to the civilization at the time, it seemed that men and women were actually pretty equal in the Minoan civilization. It obviously wasn't the case kind of, around the globe at the time, but Minoan culture was kind of set apart, and they're actually fairly equal when you look at a lot of the artifacts, like kind of the vases and things like that. And it was likely that there were high priestesses that were very, very powerful at the time. And there's a great statue that I've put on the Kickstarter page of this high priestess kind of with two snakes in her hands, kind of doing this dance. And there's some really interesting thoughts on that by historians. But sure. Yeah, certainly. It seemed like men and women were fairly equal in terms of kind of positions of power, basically, at that time.
That's really interesting, because it sounds like they were advanced in several different ways in that society. Did you take, for instance, the gender roles that you're kind of describing and how they were seen as more equal? How did you incorporate something like that within the comic and your characters?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to. So in this first one, it's pretty action packed, and so unfortunately I didn't really get time within this first issue to kind of address that. But that's coming down the line in terms of actually demonstrating that in the comic. So I can't wait to kind of demonstrate that aspect to it, and show that other cultures at the time weren't so accepting of that.
Yeah, that would be awesome, especially because I think a lot of people might be under the impression, since it was a society from so long ago, that they might be more barbaric than was actually the case. And I'd definitely be interested in talking about kind of springboarding off of that. If you could maybe go into a bit more detail about some of the main characters in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got King Minos, who you can see on the front cover there, kind of wielding what's called a labrys. So that's a double axe, and he's got a lion cape hood as well, which is a lot of fun. Because they did, of course, wear animal skins back then. But he's based on the mythological King Minos that I'm sure a lot of us know a little bit about with the Minotaur mythos. But he, for me, is a really good king. He's an honourable guy that's always trying to do the right thing and always keep a nice balance within his kingdom. And he has a son who's one of the main characters as well, Prince Georgus, who is his youngest son. And in the beginning of the comic that you can actually see on the Kickstarter there, he is coming of age and he's able to lead the sacrifice of the bull to Poseidon, who they worship. And that's because Poseidon was not only the god of the sea, but he was god of disasters basically as well, so volcanoes and things like that. So since this eruption, they've kind of been sacrificing a bull every year to him. And now it's Georgus's turn. And then on top of that as well, you see her, I think, in the pages, Queen Pasiphae, who is King Minos's wife and equal ruler, although we don't get a chance to explore that in this first issue. That'll certainly come up in later issues as well, just to demonstrate that fact. And then on the front cover as well, you don't see her in the pages just yet, but you've got Gaia, who is Minos's and Pasiphae's youngest daughter, who has got a lot to play with in the future, basically. Put it that way. I'll keep that nice and vague. But she becomes very important in future issues. And then on the flip side, apart from the royalty of Knossos, there's also Theseus, who obviously comes from the mythological Theseus, and he is a tribute from mainland Greece, because every year mainland Greece has been giving human tributes to Knossos in order to do the bull leaping and dancing that they did at the time, and that was a real thing that they did, was the bull leaping and bull dancing at the time. They've got loads and loads of pieces of art of people jumping over bulls, and it's insane. If you YouTube bull leaping, they still do it in Spain. So there's a real move from kind of actually doing the bull stabbing that they do, like with the red cape. Can't remember what we call that. But yeah, so there's a real move from kind of doing that, the so-called traditional bull matador type stuff, to actually doing the bull leaping and dancing. So they're still kind of got a bull in a stadium, but they just kind of risk their lives by jumping over this bull, and things like that. It's absolutely nuts what they're doing. But basically, this is what they did back in the day.
It sounds very hardcore.
Oh yeah, seriously hardcore. It's you don't want to make a mistake, otherwise you're going to end up with a horn in you. And Theseus is part of the tributes from mainland Greece to Crete to do that, but he's got an ulterior motive, basically, that you'll have to find out later when the first issue properly comes out. And then I've also got King Agamemnon, who is a king on mainland Greece, and specifically the Mycenaeans. And yeah, he is been having to send tributes to King Minos for all of what happened several years ago, because Agamemnon got a bit greedy, basically. And yeah, he's getting a bit sick and tired of kind of having to bend the knee to King Minos.
Which spells trouble, basically.
Oh, yes, precisely. Yeah, exactly.
So it sounds like a big aspect of the characters, besides also the royalty status of them, is also that there's a family dynamic going on there too, with a lot of the characters being related and under this hierarchy. I'm kind of curious to hear more about the whole family dynamic and how that plays into the story at large.
So the way that really works is that, I mean, Georgos very much looks up to his dad, and he's keen to kind of impress him. The way that it would really play into the story is, I'm trying to think of a way to describe it without giving too much away.
No, feel free to leave us wanting more. So
yeah, exactly. Well, they're a very loving family, and they try to listen to each other, and they'll do anything for one another as well. So yeah, the dynamic is that they'll do absolutely anything for each other, but particularly Minos and Pasiphae will protect their children at all costs. Yeah, that's probably the best way I can describe it without giving away what happens in the first issue.
No, I think that's more than enough for us. I mean, it's definitely very interesting. I'm definitely interested to hear your take on, since these characters touch on history between Minos and Agamemnon, I'm kind of curious to see how you feel. I'm sure you've read possibly interpretations of these characters in other, fictionalized works, whether it be Agamemnon, maybe in plays or things like that. Yeah. I'd be curious to see how you feel your interpretation of the characters differs from other fictional interpretations you've seen.
Yeah, well, I think where the difference is, so Agamemnon is often depicted as a tyrant, because he was one of the main kings behind Troy. So he's often a tyrant. But I'd say where mine differs is probably Minos, because King Minos is often also depicted as a tyrant as well. And I don't think that was the case. I think the king that was at Knossos was probably a much loved king, because they were all seemingly, Crete was very well off at the time. He might have been seen as a tyrant elsewhere, but on Knossos, I'm sure he was very much loved because everybody was really well off. So my take is that Minos was probably a good king. And again, not that Minos was not just the only person in charge. So you'd have a king and queen that were equally ruling. So King Minos and Queen Pasiphae would be much loved as a monarching couple. So yeah, I think that's probably where it differs, is just depicting Minos and Pasiphae as a good ruling couple.
How do you think they would fare today if they were to lead the world as it is today?
I think, they'd be blown away about what's going on right now.
A little bit.
I think, yeah, just a little bit. I
Might
think
take
we're all blown away about what's going on right now. But yeah, I think they'd really struggle to see, when we left it, we were on a good path. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's been like 3,500 years. What have you been doing?
Like, did you not spend any of this time preparing?
Exactly. Thinking about being nice to each other. I don't know. Yeah. I think they'd be exceedingly shocked about what's been going on in the world. And yeah, no, it's incredible, really, and particularly they were pretty technologically advanced, as I mentioned before, and it's actually, they think that it's the first evidence of a flushing toilet. So they had a flushing toilet in the Palace of Knossos, which is incredible, really.
Yeah.
3,500 years ago. It's pretty nuts. Yeah, we've got much to learn about them as well.
Clearly, you need to have that in a future issue, of course.
Yes. Oh yeah, 100%. That's definitely gonna feature.
So how do you feel? I think we kind of started touching on this a bit, and I'd kind of like to hear about it in more detail, is how you feel people will be able to relate to this story, given that it's such ancient history, how you feel people today will be able to relate to it.
For me, I think they'll be able to relate to it through the adversity that the Knossos royal family are going to be facing, and them kind of having to do what they need to do to survive. And in future issues, I think it's going to connect with readers on a level of having to go through adversity on your own as well, because although your family can be there some of the time, they can't always be there, and sometimes you got to go through things by yourself, particularly when you get older. So yeah, I think connecting on that level to the readers is how it's going to work out. But also, the troubles that you get within a family as well, particularly with siblings as well, when you're kind of you're ish similar ages, but there's also a dynamic of one of you's older, one of you's younger, and you end up with the older one telling the younger one what to do, and the younger one not necessarily wanting to follow what the older sibling is telling them to do, because you're just my brother, you're not my parents, type of thing.
Yeah, the inevitable sibling rivalry there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, kind of shifting focus a little more fully onto the people who will hopefully be backing Band of Warriors and then reading it themselves. Kind of an interesting tidbit that I saw you had on the Kickstarter was that you have a letters page that'll be featured in the book, Fans of Warriors, which I thought was a really cool aspect, because I don't see too many Kickstarter projects that are kind of offering a letters page. So I was kind of wondering if you could tell us a bit more about how that idea came to you, and how people can get involved with it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I've kind of been wanting to do a letters page for ages, but I just didn't feel like the Milford Green series was the right place for it. Project Hoax was a one shot. Access Denied at this point in time is a one shot as well. And again, I'm not so sure it was suitable. But the idea with Band of Warriors is that it's going to be, ideally, we've got this first 6 issues planned, but I'd love to turn it into an ongoing series. And I always love letter pages, because it's so much fun when a creator is connecting directly with the readers, and all the other readers get to kind of find out a little bit more about the story, even a little bit of banter between the creator and one of the readers who sends in a letter and things like that. And it just seems like a lot of fun to me. So trying to bring back the letters page is what I'm wanting to do. Yeah, no, it's really just a case of people getting in touch with me, and you can just email me on samuelgeorgelondon@gmail.com, and then just put in your subject line Fans of Warriors. And yeah, if you read through the Kickstarter campaign, feel free to ask me any questions. I'll be able to answer them in the letters page when we publish the first issue.
Yeah, it's a really nice way to kind of connect with your readers differently than otherwise. It's a very interesting kind of perk that people get with the book. Now, talking about the Kickstarter platform that you're using in particular, I know in your case you've had 6 successful Kickstarters before this one, which I think is definitely a very impressive number.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are definitely people who struggle with kind of setting up a Kickstarter and getting it to reach that goal. So I'd be interested to hear maybe some tips you have for people who are either doing their first Kickstarter, or they've done a couple and they're still looking to find their groove, so to speak, with Kickstarter.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think if you're just starting out doing a Kickstarter, I was very fortunate with my first one, which was the original Milford Green. I based the campaign format of the campaign off of successful Kickstarter campaigns. So yeah, when you're making your campaign, make sure that you look at successful campaigns and kind of base how you structure yours on successful campaigns, and that's what I did. And then I think I got fairly lucky with the idea that I had, which was, Victorians and aliens, and that seemed to resonate with the Kickstarter community. It really kind of took off. But at the same time, I really made sure that I was connecting with other creators on Kickstarter at the same time. So make sure that you reach out to other Kickstarter creators and offer to do cross promotion as well. So that's what I did. And those that kind of said, yeah, it sounds great, were very, very helpful in terms of putting it out to their backers, as well as me putting their projects out to the backers that I had. And yeah, I got really lucky with a few that were kind of really big projects. But, if you don't try, if you don't ask, you don't get. So you just got to kind of put yourself out there like that. But just kind of make sure that you're being nice about it. Don't be presumptuous or anything. And, if you don't hear back, forget about it. Just move on. You could do a follow-up for sure. But if they don't reply to the follow-up, then you're just going to have to leave it and kind of move on a little bit. But I know that not everybody does kind of cross promotion, but I think it really does help Kickstarter creators to do the whole cross promotion thing. And then other than that, yeah, definitely get in touch with every comic blog under the sun that you can, ideally, including things like Broken Frontier, Pipe Dream Comics. These are all kind of UK based ones, but then of course you got Frontline, so you can you can get in touch with you.
We're here.
Exactly. And you guys can help. And yeah, just make sure that you try and connect with people on things like Twitter as well. So if you search on Twitter, I just backed whatever the title of your project is, then you might find that your supporters are actually tweeting about you but not including you in the tweet. So if you search I just backed Band of Warriors, then a load of tweets will come up that don't include me in the tweet, and I can kind of connect with those backers. Also obviously retweet the tweet that they put out there, but then try and get them to continually share the project as well at the same time. And then other than kind of all of those types of nuts and bolts, the other thing is to make sure that your idea is actually appealing to people. At the same time, try and make it as professional looking as possible. And I know sometimes it requires a little bit of money to put into it to try and make it look professional, but it's well worth it. Because when people see that, you've clearly put work into it and, you're trying to be as professional as you can, I think people certainly appreciate that. And, the quality of comics on Kickstarter now is really, it's getting really high, I think. And you've really got to make sure that you stick with that level of quality, because otherwise you just, people's expectations are getting higher, I think, of Kickstarter comics. So you've got to make sure that you keep up in that respect, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all really awesome advice that people would be, very beneficial to listen to, particularly with, the cross promotion between anything from creators to press to just the social media aspects you mentioned, I think are really important to keep in mind when doing a Kickstarter project.
And yeah, just making sure that you're connecting with your backers as well, because it's easily done that you can have a good start, but if you're not necessarily connecting with your backers, you can actually have people fall off, and you're your funds can actually start to go away if you're not kind of connecting with your backers properly. So just kind of make sure that you water your garden basically as well.
Yeah. Kind of going off of that, I'm kind of curious if you, during the previous 6 Kickstarters you've had, if you've ever taken an approach or maybe gone about something in a certain way, and then you ended up figuring out, oh no, this is less effective than if I do this. I should avoid doing things like this in the future, that kind of stuff that you could maybe talk a bit about.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific thing that I tried.
Good.
I mean,
You're too good.
Yeah.
So I can't.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have tried one of those Kickstarter promotion websites once, because when you do a Kickstarter, you get inundated by third-party services.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah, that are like, yeah, we can promote your comic for like $50 or something like that, and stuff like this. And I did that once. I didn't get anything from it. So, you know, for the most part, I recommend not to go with those. It's pretty pointless. So yeah, that felt like that was the only thing that kind of has actually let me down. And I mean, gosh, you know what, I always worry about updates.
Oh yes, I do that
Yeah,
too.
you do, yeah. So I always worry that, have I phrased everything correctly? Because obviously you don't want to send an update out and then perhaps you phrase something weirdly that you didn't think about, and then a backer reads that and says, you know what, I don't want to support this anymore. It's like, no. Yeah, exactly. So I always worry about that. And you know what, it has happened a few times where I've sent an update and then, you know, maybe a couple of backers unsupport, you know, but that's not necessarily what you've said. All it maybe is that, you know, because you sent an update, it's reminded them that they've backed this one, and then they look at it again and go, oh, you know what, I'd prefer to back this one over this one, or something like that. I don't know. So it's difficult to work out the cause and effect with all of that stuff. But yeah, and that's actually another tip. Be nice in your updates and things. I have actually I saw the other day an update on Twitter that somebody posted, a Kickstarter update, and it's post being funded though, but he was really going at the backers, like saying, you guys don't know what it's like, and yeah, like really kind of dissing the backers and things. Like, whoa, dude, chill out.
No sense. That's like someone is handing you a $20 bill and you're trying to like punch them in the face.
Exactly. It was kind of bizarre. So yeah, always be grateful and thankful to your backers, because it's incredible that anybody's going to be, you know, parting with their hard-earned cash into one of your creations. So you always just got to make sure that you're kind of grateful and try and be understanding of from the backers' perspective as well. If things are taking longer than expected, just be upfront with people, and Kickstarter backers are generally understanding. You know, if things are delayed, they're delayed. They don't really mind. You just got to tell them honestly and say, I really appreciate everybody's support, but yeah, it's going to be an extra month or two before you get your rewards, I'm afraid. And most Kickstarter backers are completely understanding of it.
Yeah, moral of the story is you should be transparent and you should be as nice and polite as possible.
100%. That's good advice for both Kickstarter and life, I think.
I think so, for sure. I guess we're sort of winding it down now, so I would like to ask, before we end the interview, you know, for you to kind of promote yourself and what else you're working on. I know in particular you have your own publishing company, that Band of Warriors will be under Signal Comics. So I don't know if you want to talk about a bit about that and just some of the other upcoming projects you have.
Yeah, so Signal Comics is the publishing label that I kind of created for the initial Milford Green, and it's continued to be my publishing label for all of my Kickstarter creations. And it's a bit of a pipe dream, really, that one day it'll become a fully fledged publishing house. Would be amazing, where, you know, I'm able to publish other creators and things like that. I'm really hoping that does happen at some point, but yeah, gonna have to wait until a certain time when perhaps got a bigger fan base and things like that before being able to do that. But it's there waiting, ready to hopefully support other creator-owned comics. So I can't wait for that day. And but that's only going to happen with kind of new projects and things. Of course, I've got a secret new project that I'm working on that I can't talk about, but I'm going to say just to kind of create some mystery for the future. But apart from my mystery project, of course, going to be continually working on Band of Warriors, and obviously the next one will be Band of Warriors issue 2, which hopefully I'll kickstart perhaps April, May time, I think would be the plan, if everything goes according to plan, that is. And then also Access Denied is almost ready to get out to the world, so I can't wait for that. And then, my word, I've got so many story ideas.
You've got a lot going on already.
I know. I'm glutton for punishment is what it is. And I've got so many ideas that I'd love to give to an artist, but it really is just a matter of time, unfortunately. Obviously, I've got my day job that I've got to do, and I do most of this in my spare time, so it keeps me busy, that's for sure. And I've got ideas for a follow-up for Access Denied as well that I'd like to do, and I've got another story that I'm trying to work on to do with Michael Hankinen, who's the artist for both the Milford Green series and Access Denied as well, of course. So that's a lot of fun. Oh, actually, speaking of Michael, we are actually going to be putting together a hardcover edition of Milford Green and the entire Milford Green saga. So we're going to have an oversized hardcover edition that I think is going to be kickstarting through March, which is going to be a lot of fun. And Michael's done a custom cover for that, kind of encapsulating all 3 books in the series. And to say the least, it's an epic front cover. So I can't wait to get that out to the world as well.
Yeah, I'm certainly excited to see that.
I really can't wait. And then also having it oversized as well. So it's going to be like A4 paper size, which says that's 29.7 centimeters high, which is trying to think off the top of my head how much that is in inches.
Don't ask me to do math.
Yeah, I know. Just so around about 10 inches, maybe 11. It's a sizable book. And I'm looking forward to getting that out to the world, but also getting one in my hands as well. And then just being able to see it all big. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, you certainly have plenty to keep you busy, I would say, this year alone.
Definitely. And long may it continue.
Oh, yes, I certainly hope so. But yeah, thank you for taking the time to, chat with me and kind of sharing your history knowledge with us and all the mythology and all these awesome sounding projects that you'll be giving us.
It's an absolute pleasure, Nicole. It's always wonderful to speak to you. So thanks very much.
Thank you. That means a lot. But yeah, best of luck with your Kickstarter, which as of this recording, I believe still has about 2 weeks to go. Thanks for joining me, hopefully once again, to listen to this little experiment of mine. Be sure to check out Band of Warriors #1, which will be active on Kickstarter until January 29th, 2021. Please let me know what you thought of this episode by mentioning me on your socials at comic_maven on Twitter. If you are a creator with a project you're trying to crowdfund and you'd like to be featured on an episode, reach out to me on my website, comicmaven.com.